HE image, the illusion and the first cracks. Nobody saw this coming. Or maybe, looking back, they did, but they didn't want to believe it. For years, Papoose existed in hip-hop culture as something rare. Quiet, controlled, disciplined. A man who didn't chase headlines, didn't spiral publicly, didn't embarrass himself online. In an industry where chaos is often currency, he stood apart. Loyal husband, supportive partner, respected lyricist. Someone who seemed immune to the usual scandals that swallow celebrity relationships whole. That image mattered. It wasn't just branding, it was identity. So when his name began trending alongside words like double life, receipts, hotel footage, and dump Clarissa, the internet froze for a split second. Then it erupted. Because this wasn't supposed to be him. At first, it came quietly. A few whispers here and there, a comment under a post, a vague accusation wrapped in allegedly. The kind of chatter that usually dies within hours. But this time, it didn't fade. It multiplied. Screenshots started circulating. People began asking questions they'd never asked before. And then Tasha K pressed upload. What followed wasn't speculation. It was combustion. According to her, this wasn't a misunderstanding or a messy breakup blown out of proportion. This was a carefully hidden double life that had been operating in plain sight for months, possibly longer. One public relationship. One private situation. 2 women. 1 man, and an entire audience that had been fed a carefully curated version of reality. The episode didn't tease. It didn't dance around the allegations. It went straight for the jugular. Tasha K claimed that while the public believed Papoose was committed to Clarissa Shields, boxing champion, global star, symbol of discipline and strength, there was another woman quietly woven into the picture. A woman named Tessie. And according to the alleged evidence, this wasn't a casual overlap or emotional confusion. It was calculated. People listening felt the tone shift instantly. This wasn't gossip for clicks. This was being framed as exposure. As the episode played, social media reacted in real time. Tweets, comments, voice notes, reaction videos popping up within minutes. Everyone scrambling to process the same thought. Wait, since when? Because from the outside, Clarissa and Papoose looked solid. They were seen together, supporting each other publicly, appearing united. Clarissa spoke about growth, focus, discipline, both in her sport and her personal life. Papoose showed up, at events, at fights, at celebrations. To fans, it looked intentional, grounded, real. And that's what made what came next feel so devastating. According to insiders cited by Tasha K, while Clarissa believed she was building something serious, there were entire moments happening without her knowledge. Late-night meetings, hotel rooms, private conversations that never made it to the timeline. Another woman receiving attention, affection, and promises at the same time. The alleged receipts were described as overwhelming. Video clips that show 2 people far too comfortable to be strangers. Whispered conversations captured on audio. Messages that don't sound confused or accidental, but deliberate, strategic, almost transactional in tone. One alleged message hit especially hard. Dump Clarissa. Those 2 words spread like wildfire, screenshotted, quoted, turned into headlines, debated endlessly, because if true, that wasn't heartbreak, it was instruction. No emotion, no explanation, just a command. Another alleged message reportedly read, Clarissa is done. Again, no softness, no remorse, just finality. The internet didn't know what to do with that. People replayed the clips obsessively, trying to reconcile what they were hearing with the man they thought they knew. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Some refused to believe it. Others said the signs were always there, just ignored. But Clarissa Shields, she reportedly had no idea. Sources close to her described the moment the truth surfaced as devastating, not just emotionally, but psychologically. To find out your relationship wasn't what you believed, and to discover it alongside millions of strangers online is a humiliation few people can imagine. And Clarissa wasn't just anyone. She was admired for her control, her discipline, her mental toughness. Watching someone like that get blindsided publicly felt cruel. What made it worse, according to those watching closely, was Papoose's response. Instead of retreating into silence, reports claim he became defensive. Clips began circulating of him snapping back, explaining, justifying, pushing against the narrative rather than absorbing it. Some viewers felt his tone wasn't remorseful, it was irritated. And that's when the conversation shifted. This stopped being about whether he cheated. It became about how he moved. Because as more alleged evidence surfaced, the story began to feel less like a messy emotional situation and more like a pattern. Tasha K didn't stop at Clarissa. She alleged this behavior stretched back further, that this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. According to her claims, the cycle looked familiar. Ramai Ma, Clarissa Shields, Tessie, different chapters, same structure, emotional investment, control, attention, then collapse. Fans started connecting dots they'd never examined before. Old interviews resurfaced. Old statements took on new meaning. Moments once praised as loyalty were now questioned. And then the financial angle entered the chat. Discussions emerged around money, appearances, and benefit. Claims that Papoose's presence at Clarissa's fights wasn't just support, it was paid. That he was rapping, performing, positioning himself strategically. That love and opportunity may have been intertwined in uncomfortable ways. That revelation unsettled people. Because if affection comes with a price tag, what was real? The more the story unfolded, the more it felt like a slow-motion collapse. Clarissa's silence grew louder. Tessie's presence became impossible to ignore, and Tasha K teased that more receipts were waiting. By the end of part one thing was clear. The image was cracking. The illusion was fading. And whatever truth was buried beneath it, all was coming up, whether anyone was ready or not. And this was only the beginning. The RECIPTS, the hotel rooms, and the double life unmasked. Because this is where the story stopped being about rumors and started becoming about evidence, or at least what was being presented to the public as evidence. This was the moment when people stopped asking, "Is this true?" and started asking, "How deep does this go?" When Tasha K returned with follow-up drops, she didn't come with opinions. She came with what she described as receipts, audio clips, video footage, screenshots, timelines, and the way she released them felt intentional, strategic, almost surgical. Each piece landed just long enough for the internet to absorb it before the next one detonated. The first thing that shifted public perception was the hotel footage. According to Tasha K, videos began circulating that allegedly showed Papoose and Tessie inside luxury hotel rooms, settings that didn't look accidental or rushed. These weren't grainy hallway clips or distant sightings. These were intimate, close-range moments. Two people seated comfortably, bodies angled toward each other, soft voices, familiar laughter, no tension, no awkwardness, no sign of secrecy between them, only secrecy from everyone else. Viewers immediately noticed something unsettling. This didn't look like a new connection. This didn't look like curiosity. It looked practiced. People replayed the clips frame by frame, dissecting body language the way internet detectives always do. The way they leaned in. The way they spoke quietly. The way they seemed completely at ease. Comment sections filled with the same observation repeated over and over. They look way too comfortable. And then came the audio recordings. Allegedly captured conversations, private moments never meant to leave those rooms. Voices lowered, words chosen carefully. The tone wasn't chaotic or guilty, it was calm, familiar, almost routine, and that's what made listeners uneasy. Because guilt usually sounds rushed. This didn't. In these clips, according to those who heard them, there was no confusion about who was talking to whom. No emotional panic. No hesitation. Just two people speaking as if the situation was already understood, already arranged. That's when the narrative shifted again. This wasn't about overlap. This was about orchestration. Screenshots followed. Messages allegedly exchanged that showed planning, quiet plans to move forward, to transition, to end one situation while securing another. The alleged texts didn't read like emotional breakdowns. They read like strategy. And that's when one phrase changed everything. Dump Clarissa. 2 words that landed like a slap. People weren't just shocked by the instruction itself, but by the tone. No explanation, no empathy, no acknowledgement of the emotional weight behind it, just direction, execution. Another message reportedly followed with the cold finality of, "Clarissa is done." Online reactions exploded. Some fans immediately defended Papoose, claiming screenshots can be manipulated, audio can be edited, context can be missing. Others said the consistency across clips, messages, and timelines made denial feel harder by the hour. Meanwhile, Clarissa Shields remained mostly silent. And that silence spoke volumes. According to sources close to her, the way she found out was devastating. Not through a private conversation, not through honesty, but through the same flood of leaks everyone else was watching. To learn your relationship wasn't what you thought, while strangers dissect it publicly, is a kind of betrayal that hits differently. Clarissa wasn't just hurt. She was reportedly humiliated. Because the story wasn't just about infidelity, it was about being unknowingly placed inside a triangle. About realizing moments you believed were real may have been shared with someone else simultaneously. About questioning every memory. The internet felt it. Comment sections shifted from curiosity to rage. Sympathy flooded Clarissa's name. Clips of her past interviews resurfaced, moments where she spoke about discipline, trust, growth. Now those same words felt heavy. And then there was Tessie. At first, people wanted to believe she was unaware, that she'd been misled too. But the more material surfaced, the harder that narrative became to defend. Her voice appeared in recordings, her laughter, her responses. Her tone suggested awareness, not confusion. The interactions didn't sound like someone discovering a lie. They sounded like someone already inside the arrangement. That's when Tessie stopped being a side character. She became central. Social media split sharply. Some accused her of knowingly participating. Others argued she may have been manipulated herself. But no one could ignore her role anymore. Every frame she appeared in was analyzed, every word replayed. And still, the drops continued. What unsettled viewers the most wasn't just the content, it was the calm surrounding it. The lack of visible panic, the absence of regret in tone. It created a chilling contrast when compared to Clarissa's apparent devastation. Meanwhile, Papoose's reactions began surfacing more frequently. Instead of stepping back, he addressed the situation, sometimes defensively, sometimes with visible frustration. Clips showed him snapping back at critics, pushing against the narrative, challenging accusations. For some viewers, it read as self-protection. For others, it felt dismissive. What made things worse, according to insiders, was the claim that communication with Tessie allegedly continued even after the leaks began circulating. That detail changed everything. Because if true, it meant this wasn't damage control, it was commitment. The internet latched onto that idea instantly. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't remorse. This was choice. And once that idea took hold, the conversation became ruthless. People began re-examining everything: public appearances, old interviews, past relationships. Tasha K leaned into that shift, alleging this behavior wasn't new, that it followed a familiar pattern, women rotating through the same emotional cycle while Papoose remained centered. Ramai Ma's name resurfaced again. Old allegations, old controversies, old moments that once seemed resolved were dragged back into the light. People started asking whether what they were seeing now was an extension of something long hidden. The story grew bigger than Clarissa, bigger than Tessie, bigger than Papoose himself. It became about image versus reality, about how easily public personas can mask private behavior, about how fame allows people to compartmentalize, one face for the world, another for closed doors. And Tasha K wasn't done. She teased more drops, more evidence, more conversations that hadn't yet surfaced. Each tease kept audiences on edge. Every pause felt deliberate. The anticipation alone kept the story alive. By the end of part 2, one thing was undeniable. This was no longer rumor territory. This was a full-scale public reckoning, unfolding in real time. Hotel rooms had replaced headlines. Whispers had become recordings. Screenshots had rewritten narratives. And at the center of it all stood Clarissa Shields, strong, disciplined, admired, now facing betrayal under the harshest possible spotlight. The pattern, the power, and the women left in the wreckage. By the time the internet finished digesting the hotel footage and leaked messages, the conversation had already evolved into something darker. People weren't just reacting anymore, they were analyzing. Slowing clips down, replaying audio, lining up timelines, and what many claimed to see wasn't chaos. It was structure. That's when one word began surfacing everywhere: pattern. Because the more people stepped back from the shock, the more familiar the story started to feel. Not identical, but eerily consistent. Different faces, same emotional arc, same imbalance of power, same ending, one woman shattered while the man at the center moved on seemingly untouched. According to Tasha K and others amplifying her claims, this didn't begin with Clarissa Shields. It didn't suddenly appear out of nowhere. This was just the latest chapter in a much longer book that many fans had never bothered to read closely. The name that kept resurfacing was unavoidable: Remaima. For years, Papoose's loyalty to Ramai was praised as legendary. He stood by her publicly, defended her, supported her through legal battles and industry backlash. That narrative became part of his identity. The man who stays, the man who holds it down, the man who doesn't fold when things get hard. But now, under this new light, people started re-examining that story, not to erase it, but to question what they may have missed. Old interviews resurfaced where tension had been brushed off as stress. Moments that once seemed like private struggles now felt loaded with subtext. Past allegations, once dismissed as noise, were pulled back into conversation. And suddenly, the idea that this behavior was isolated began to crumble. According to allegations now circulating, the pattern looked like this: emotional closeness, public support, private imbalance. A woman deeply invested. A man maintaining control, not through loud dominance, but through calm authority, silence, and strategic affection. That's what disturbed people the most. There were no public blow-ups, no messy live streams, no chaotic arguments, just quiet decisions made behind closed doors. And when it came to Clarissa Shields, that imbalance was impossible to ignore. Clarissa wasn't just emotionally invested. She was professionally disciplined, mentally focused, and deeply protective of her image. She spoke often about growth, control, and staying centered. To many, she represented strength in its purest form. Which is why the betrayal hit harder. Because if someone like Clarissa could be blindsided this completely, what did that say about how easily control can be disguised as support? As fans replayed footage and statements, something became painfully clear. Clarissa believed she was building something stable, something intentional. Meanwhile, according to the allegations, Papoose was compartmentalizing, keeping one relationship visible and another hidden, each serving a different role. One offered public credibility. The other offered private intimacy. And that realization shifted public sympathy almost entirely. Because this wasn't just cheating, it was emotional manipulation. The alleged messages didn't sound impulsive. They sounded organized. The tone wasn't regretful. It was directive. People fixated on how cold and strategic the language appeared. Ending one relationship wasn't framed as an emotional reckoning. It was framed as a task to complete. That's where the conversation turned from heartbreak to power. Who had control? Who had information? Who knew the full picture? And according to those dissecting the situation, Clarissa had been operating with only half the truth. The financial layer only intensified the discomfort. As clips and commentary spread, questions emerged about money, benefit, and access. Claims circulated that Papoose's presence at Clarissa's fights wasn't purely supportive, that he was being paid, rapping, performing, and positioning himself strategically within her rising profile. To some, that reframed everything. If true, it meant the relationship wasn't just emotional, it was transactional. That love and opportunity were intertwined in ways that blurred sincerity. Fans began questioning whether Clarissa had been emotionally invested, while Papoose remained strategically detached. That imbalance hurt to witness, because Clarissa was the one absorbing the public humiliation. Clarissa was the one staying silent, while clips replayed endlessly. Clarissa was the one being forced to relive betrayal through strangers' commentary. And then there was Tasha. By this point, Tasha had fully entered the conversation, not as a mystery, but as a participant. The leaked materials, according to viewers, showed familiarity, comfort, and awareness. Her reactions and recordings didn't sound surprised. They sounded engaged. That complicated everything. People wanted a clean villain. They wanted a clear victim. But this story refused simplicity. Some accused Tasha of knowingly stepping into a situation she understood. Others argued she may have been fed a different version of reality, manipulated with promises, reassured with half-truths. But either way, her involvement underscored the same issue: control. Who was controlling the narrative? Who was managing information? Who was benefiting? As Tasha K continued teasing more drops, the internet became increasingly restless. Each new release felt like confirmation rather than revelation. The idea of coincidence had vanished. What remained was repetition. Rama, Clarissa, Tasha. Different women, same outcome. And then there was Papoose's demeanor throughout it all. Instead of retreating, he pushed back. Instead of quiet reflection, he became defensive. Clips circulated showing frustration, irritation, and refusal to back down. For many, that reaction felt wrong, not because he defended himself, but because he didn't appear shaken. There was no visible remorse. No public acknowledgement of pain caused. No softness. Just resistance. And that hardened public opinion fast. Because people can forgive mistakes, but they struggle to forgive indifference. This was no longer about whether Papoose cheated. It was about whether he operated in cycles. Whether control had been mistaken for loyalty. Whether silence had protected behavior for far too long. Clarissa Shields' pain had become symbolic, not just of betrayal, but of how even the strongest women can be emotionally outmaneuvered when power dynamics are uneven. And the internet knew one thing for certain. If this pattern was real, then the fallout wasn't finished. Because patterns don't end quietly. They end when exposure forces them to. And Part 4 would prove just how explosive that exposure was about to become. It had become something far more brutal. A live public trial, held across timelines, podcasts, comment sections, and reaction videos, where evidence was replayed endlessly and verdicts were delivered without hesitation. The internet didn't wait for explanations. It didn't wait for clarity. It didn't wait for healing. It decided. Once Tasha K's alleged receipts reached critical mass, social media flipped from curiosity to condemnation. Timelines filled with side-by-side clips, slowed-down audio, annotated screenshots, and long threads connecting dots that people claimed were always there. What once felt shocking now felt inevitable to many observers. And the pressure mounted. Every time Papoose spoke, or didn't speak, it became content. Every facial expression, every defensive clip, every irritated response was dissected like courtroom footage. Silence was called avoidance. Speaking was called incrimination. There was no safe move left. That's when his defensive posture became the story. Instead of stepping back, Papoose pushed forward. He addressed accusations head-on, but the tone didn't land the way he may have expected. Clips circulated of him snapping, correcting narratives, insisting people had things wrong. To some viewers, it read as a man fighting false accusations. To others, it sounded like a man furious that his control over the story was slipping. And perception is everything. Online audiences weren't just listening to what he said, they were watching how he said it. The lack of visible remorse, the frustration in his voice, the refusal to acknowledge Clarissa's pain publicly, it all fed a growing narrative that this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about exposure. The internet doesn't forgive defensiveness easily, especially when someone else is visibly hurting. Meanwhile, Clarissa Shields' emotional state became increasingly apparent, even without her saying much. Her silence was interpreted as devastation. People began analyzing her body language in old clips, revisiting interviews, pulling quotes where she spoke about trust, focus, and emotional discipline. Those words now felt heavy. Fans flooded her pages with messages of support. Some expressed heartbreak on her behalf. Others expressed anger for her. Many simply said they were sorry she had to endure this publicly. Watching someone known for strength forced into vulnerability hit a nerve. This wasn't a celebrity scandal anymore. This was emotional trauma playing out in real time. And social media, ruthless as always, amplified it. Every leaked clip resurfaced daily. Every alleged message was reposted. Commentary channels broke the situation down frame by frame, tone by tone. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing whether Papoose's reactions revealed guilt or arrogance. Hashtags trended. Memes appeared. Opinions hardened. And in the middle of it all stood Tussie, no longer a background figure, but a lightning rod. Her involvement fueled debate nonstop. Some accused her of knowingly participating. Others argued she was manipulated too. But the leaked recordings made one thing difficult to ignore. She didn't sound unaware. She sounded present, comfortable, engaged. That reality complicated sympathy. Because once awareness enters the picture, innocence becomes harder to claim. And then Tasha K escalated again. She teased additional material, more audio, more footage, more messages. Each tease sent shockwaves through the internet. Even without immediate releases, the anticipation alone kept the story alive. People stayed glued to their screens, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And the longer the story stretched on, the more exhausting it became, for Clarissa especially. The emotional weight of knowing millions of strangers were dissecting your heartbreak is crushing. According to sources close to her, Clarissa was reportedly devastated by the leaked hotel footage in particular. Seeing the intimacy, hearing the familiarity, realizing the extent of what had been hidden. Those clips weren't just evidence. They were emotional weapons. Every replay reopened the wound. Meanwhile, Papoose's public frustration continued to fuel backlash. His refusal to retreat was interpreted by many as refusal to reflect. People began saying the quiet part out loud, that the issue wasn't just infidelity, it was emotional indifference. Audiences can tolerate mistakes. They struggle with coldness. And the contrast was brutal. Clarissa Shields, known for discipline and composure, appeared shattered. Papoose, once admired for loyalty, appeared irritated. That contrast sealed public opinion for many. The internet trial had reached its verdict. By this point, the scandal had evolved into a cultural moment. Content creators called it a case study in manipulation. Commentators discussed power dynamics in celebrity relationships. Fans debated how fame allows people to live multiple realities at once. The conversation expanded beyond individuals. It became about image, about how loyalty can be performative, about how silence can enable behavior, about how exposure changes everything. And Papoose's image, once carefully guarded, was now cracked beyond repair. No matter what came next, the perception had shifted permanently. Even defenders admitted the situation looked bad. Even supporters struggled to explain the tone of the messages, the calm of the recordings, the continuation of behavior after exposure. Reputations were bruised. Trust was shattered. And Clarissa Shields' heartbreak had become a public symbol of betrayal, amplified by fame. But the story wasn't finished. Because Part 5 wouldn't just ask what happened. It would ask what this all means, and whether redemption, accountability, or silence is even possible once truth collides with the internet. The aftermath, the meaning, and when the truth never stays buried. When the noise finally began to slow, not stop, but slow, the damage was already done. By the time the internet reached this stage of the saga, there was no going back to the version of events anyone once believed. The clips had been replayed too many times. The messages had been screenshotted too widely. The audio had been analyzed too deeply. What remained wasn't shock anymore, it was aftermath. And aftermath is always quieter, heavier, and more revealing. Clarissa Shields stood at the center of it. A woman celebrated for discipline, mental strength, and resilience, now navigating one of the most public betrayals of her life. According to those close to her, the emotional toll went far beyond embarrassment. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the dismantling of trust. The realization that memories once cherished may have been layered with deception. What made it worse was the scale. There is no private processing when millions of strangers are dissecting your pain. No quiet reflection when every leaked clip resurfaces daily. Clarissa's heartbreak wasn't allowed to be human. It was turned into content. Reaction videos, commentary, endless debate. And yet, her silence remained powerful. She didn't scream online. She didn't spiral publicly. She didn't weaponize her pain. She endured. And that endurance became its own statement. Fans rallied behind her, not because she demanded sympathy, but because her restraint contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her. In a culture that rewards spectacle, her composure stood out. It reminded people that dignity doesn't need explanation. Meanwhile, Papoose faced a reality he could no longer control. The image he spent years building, loyal, grounded, disciplined, had fractured. No amount of defensive explanation could fully repair it. Even those who believed he had been unfairly targeted admitted the optics were devastating. Because perception is unforgiving. The alleged messages didn't disappear. The hotel footage didn't fade. The calm tone of the recordings didn't soften with time. They lingered. And once something lives forever online, redemption becomes complicated. Tussie, too, remained trapped in the aftermath. No longer a mystery, no longer anonymous, she became part of a narrative she couldn't escape. Her involvement, whether framed as complicity or manipulation, kept her name circulating alongside accusations and debate. No clean exit. No clean narrative. Just scrutiny. And then there was Tasha K. Her role in the saga became its own controversy. Some praised her for exposing what they believed needed to be exposed. Others accused her of amplifying pain, turning private trauma into public spectacle. But even critics admitted one thing. Without her drops, this story would not exist. She forced the truth into the open, or at least her version of it. She ensured silence was no longer an option. And in the digital age, that kind of exposure carries permanent consequences. As days passed, the conversation matured. It stopped being just about cheating. It stopped being just about celebrities. It became about power. About how fame allows people to compartmentalize their lives. About how control can masquerade as calm. About how emotional manipulation doesn't always look violent or chaotic. It can look organized, quiet, and strategic. People began asking harder questions. How many relationships survive on incomplete truths? How often does loyalty exist only in public? How many times do we mistake silence for integrity? This scandal forced audiences to confront uncomfortable realities about celebrity culture and about relationships more broadly. It reminded people that image is curated, not guaranteed. That strength doesn't protect against betrayal. That even the most disciplined lives can be disrupted by deception. And most importantly, it showed that truth rarely stays buried. Not forever. Not when receipts surface. not when silence collapses. As the clip stopped trending and the commentary slowed, one thing remained clear. This story would be remembered. Not because of shock value, but because of what it revealed. Clarissa Shields' heartbreak became symbolic, not just of betrayal, but of resilience under exposure. Papoose's fall from grace became a cautionary tale about control and consequence. Tussie's involvement highlighted the messy reality of overlapping narratives. And Tasha K's role proved that in the digital age, secrets don't fade, they explode. There may never be a clean conclusion. No single statement that resolves everything. No moment where everyone agrees on the truth. But the impact is undeniable. This wasn't just gossip. It was a cultural reckoning. A reminder that love, power, and fame can collide in devastating ways. And long after the last clip stops circulating, one truth will remain. When a double life is exposed, the fallout doesn't end, it echoes. This story didn't just unfold. It left scars.